which Dipesh Chakrabarty very interestingly raises in his Provincializing Europe, that how come most of the theories that have been formulated in the Western context have been written in complete ignorance to our part of the world, and yet when they travel to this part, we actually find them useful. It's actually a paradox. Of course, it has to be problematized, but still, that's a starting point very often. Okay, now I'm going to talk about, I'm going to straight away directly talk about the question of unevenness in terms of discourse of comparative aesthetics. I refer to comparativism between Indian and Western aesthetics that have a long history stretching back to Kumaraswamy's project of correcting colonial representation of Indian art around the first quarter of 20th century. In the middle of 20th century, again there was a revival, as we talked about, of comparative aesthetics, which in India was largely triggered by K.C. Pandey's very important, at that time, absolutely path-breaking book. It came out in 2 volumes. Volume 1 was on Indian aesthetics, and Volume 2 was Western aesthetics. Both came out, published in Varanasi, 1950-1959. So there was an expectation from the post-colonial, of course he was answering to that expectations from the post-colonial aesthetician to break out of colonial tutelage and to explore aesthetics in a new light. A large number of articles and publications around comparative aesthetics appeared. But today, if we are to examine this moment critically, it is obvious how uneven the discourse around comparativism has been. Now, in K.C. Pandey's own work, if you compare the 2 volumes, this is the extent of coverage. The coverage on Western aesthetics, it's, like the major part of the book, it seems to chart the terrain, which is very well researched. You have always access to material that you can quote from. But the Indian aesthetics section is actually just a not small fragment, but compared to the coverage of Western aesthetics, it's really, quite inadequate. Within K.C. Pandey's own work, in form of these 2 formidable volumes, one on Indian and Western aesthetics, asymmetries were glaring. While a large section was devoted to study of Western aesthetics, coverage of Indian aesthetics was relatively perfunctory. Perhaps this is indicative of state of research in the field, that one tends to gravitate towards an area that has a longer history of research and operates within established core texts available for reading and counter-readings. Now, this is unfortunately not true of study of Indian aesthetics. Do we have well-defined core texts that capture the complex nuances of various positions within Indian aesthetics? Now, the way the Western intellectual tradition has evolved has maintained a line of continuity so that it is possible for a contemporary thinker to relate with the past more organically, whether it is Deleuze, Derrida, Wittgenstein, Hannah Arendt, Agamben, Zizek. Each of these contemporary thinkers have gone back to the core texts by Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, and have arrived at very contemporary understanding of politics and aesthetics. This occurs despite the break that occurred in the past at the end of Hellenism and Middle Ages. However, in the Indian context, it seems that the colonial interlude has created such a deep gulf that has posed a challenge to a contemporary dialogue with the past. Now, I just want to sort of conclude by juxtaposing these 2 covers of 2 very important books which we talked about. K.C. Pandey's Volume 1, Indian Aesthetics, Volume 2, Western Aesthetics. Now, if you just look at the choice selection of images on the 2 covers, it is, you can actually talk about the unevenness. So I just want to open it out to discussion. What is so bizarre about the 2 covers? Do you think this is more bizarre than that? Would you say this is more bizarre? If you say that, I would fully agree with you, because if you look at the cover, it would not give you an idea of what it is, what are the concerns which are going to emerge in the book. You would, by looking at this cover, you would think, oh, it's about calendar art. It's about popular visual culture. But that's not the content of the book. Okay, this is, okay, fine, fairly predictable. It's one of those, one of those Venuses from classical antiquity, which is fine because in Western aesthetics, Greek aesthetics has played a very pivotal role. But this is totally misrepresentative of what the author is planning to do. Now recently I attended a conference in Beijing, organized by the Beijing Forum, October 2015, and it had an elaborate title. It was called The Harmony of Civilization and Prosperity for All, Different Paths with Common Responsibility. Very Confucian sounding, okay? It was more a global summit than a conference on aesthetics. However, it was attended by some leading aestheticians from all over the world, because China is very well funded. An aesthetician from Europe who was sitting next to me at the inauguration ceremony, he whispered in my ear, and he said, if this conference was happening in my country, it would be titled The Conflict of Civilization, and not Harmony of Civilization. What seemed as a witty and humorous comment then no longer seemed so after the Paris massacre and its connection with the geopolitics of Syria. But what it did demonstrate to me that comparatism is here to stay, and the task at hand is to reinvent it and to update it so that it can capture the contemporary pulse of our times. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be very happy to, take questions or comments, and we can perhaps have a little discussion. Yeah.
So I was particularly drawn to the idea of translatability that you brought up throughout, in a sense, of the presentation, and it's something that I encountered a lot while studying art history in.
Would you like to speak a little bit?
Okay. So I was talking about translation as an idea running throughout the presentation, and as an idea that I encountered while studying art history in the US, which of course setting matters where you study art history. And so while I was studying there was often an anxiety that I seemed to sense in discussions about the way certain terms outside the so-called Western context couldn't be completely translated. And so that sort of became always a kind of caveat or sort of disclaimer while introducing other terms. And one of the things that I often wondered is, does a term have to be all-encompassing or so-called universal? And if it is not, does it default to a position of being culturally specific? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
This is precisely what I meant when I said that the difficulty that one encounters in translating terms, say from Sanskrit to English and vice versa, may not be seen as a disadvantage, but it should be seen as having heuristic possibility, so that through that you can actually explore the very problematic of intranslatability, which tells us something. In fact, a good translation would actually would have ramifications for both the terms, English and say Sanskrit, because it would actually bring out not what I want to say is, good translation should not pick Western term as universal normal compared to the Sanskrit terms that, oh, this is kind of slightly off the mark, exotic, and not really capturing the new core concept. At that level itself, the question of asymmetry has to be tackled. And so best way, according to me, is to turn that into a very productive field of semantic exploration. That's one way of going about it. And the other one was more humorous, like you mix up terms, like monocritically, emphasis, and so on, so that both the terms actually feed it back, literally.
The shelves of translation.
Yeah. And the biggest problem that this question of translation raises is, what is the nature of relationship between universality and cultural specificity? Now, I refuse to believe that cultural specificity is only the domain of the non-Western terms. You know, because the Western terms it should be treated as culturally specific, as historically specific, as Indian terms. They all come up at a particular historical time. The term aesthetics, the way it came up in ancient Greece, had a different valency. Quite different from the 18th century term aesthetics, which of course was reconfigured because of some kind of Kant and Hegel and so on. So within the West itself, there's a kind of a proper semantic history of these terms, which has to be understood. Likewise, I would assume the same thing is true of any cultural context.
Instead of talking about translatability and trying to export what you also mentioned somewhere, a Western concept into India, why don't you just go ahead and try to coin an Indian term and float a course, because actually we should, like you do have that the part to do that, and float something different. I mean, why would you want to translate? Why don't you have a course on Desi and Margi or something like that? Why do you even want to translate? Why is it so important to translate?
I think because today, in which case then I only have to, people will say, why are you writing in English? Just writing in any regional language or writing in Sanskrit. Because here we're also dealing with a kind of a, not just global audience, but a kind of an audience which is also deeply interested in precisely the question of asymmetrical translation. So it would kind of lead to a very essentialist and purist position, where I would only work within a particular parameters of a given culture, which leads to certain kind of insularity which I'm slightly wary of. And also I feel that it's very important to create a sense of dialogue across cultural contexts, so that comparison is not simply, if we follow what you're saying, then hunting scope for broader comparison, then comparison is seen as something which is a very internal kind of an event, which would kind of seem to restrict our focus to one specific context. It's also very important in terms of translatability. Translation is also interesting because it takes into consideration a wider constituencies of reader. It's also supposed to pose challenge to those who are not culturally accustomed to that term.
Sure, that's just an observation, but there are terms that catch on, right? Like for example, Walt and Schwab. We don't have an exact English translation of Walt and Schwab, the German term.
Yeah,
but it has got on, right? And just an observation on this slide. So one phase, obviously, what you said. But the other way of looking at it is based on your presentation only, is that probably the gentleman he had such a big overhang, which is also obvious from your pie chart, that he's tried to take an image which kind of poses a challenge to the other image that he's taken. So the ladies, there's the one, there is the two women have very, their physical parts are very prominent. Then in addition to that, he's tried to, because the whole thing was about naturalism, he's tried to take what he thought was natural. I mean, that's just an observation, so that could be another way of looking at these images. Right.
But I really slightly doubt whether there's so much of critical thinking which went into selection. It must have been, see, these things are not taken so seriously. It must have been left to the designer. Okay, over which even the author has no control. But any author should also be responsible in terms of how your book is going to be presented, because it should actually reflect your core concerns.
Since you started off by talking about comparison as a methodological tool of inquiry, I was just wondering that you talked about the shift from area studies to kind of more ideas of space, place, location, territory, in terms of more entangled geography through kind of acts of terrorism, but also kind of the concern around ecology. And in such a kind of space entangled situation, what happens to this? I mean, what are the changes that an idea or the tool or practice of comparison goes through in the context of comparison?
Yeah, thanks for raising this, because for me, ideal kind of comparison is when it is centering around case studies so that we don't fall into this realm of binary logic where I feel compelled, okay fine, each time I just want to do an east-west comparison because both are equally problematic. They're monolithic categories which can be dismantled. It's much more interesting when one is doing a specific comparative study of that particular text or that cultural context. And in fact, it is possible, the earlier person who raised the question, where you can actually restrict your comparison to that specific context, which can actually yield very interesting readings. But at the same time, if comparison can be made from that specific case study to another equally specific cultural study, which can also be located outside Indian context. So then we tend to sort of bypass or problematize these large comparisons, which can actually lead to very problematic results because you're treating them as large chunks of cultural masses.
My concern is more with the idea of theoretical framework and methodology, because when you mentioned, say, the rules of Daji and how they have gone back from Plato and connecting the present to tracing a development of a certain theoretical framework and looking at it from the post-structural and post-modernist methodologies that are there and their criticism. And you seem to suggest that comparative aesthetics as a methodology would maybe have an answer there, and also the idea that when we look at something from, say, we're looking at Indian aesthetics as such, say in the first book, when you have also, when I come across this problem that at the end of the day we had a colonial experience which has made a huge break in that, and then of course we cannot then ignore the point of how the Western theoretical framework and the development of it is affected. So how would you then methodologically or at the point of a theoretical framework say that comparative aesthetics might have a clue to how we go forward?
Yeah. See, for me, comparative aesthetics, one has to also question the very ground of comparativism. What is it that you're comparing? Now, if you think that anything in the world is comparable, it's a deeply Indian logic. That is, it's called a fallible logic because you are falling into the category of adhikosakta, like your realm is just boundless. Like you can't really do proper disciplinary research. There's no boundary to your area, which is so that is too broad. So it is very important to also indicate what can be compared and what cannot be compared. For comparisons to make sense. Otherwise, everything that I can compare anything. I can compare myself with that chair because both of us are in the same room at the same time. There's some basic commonality between the chair and me, but that is not going to take me further into analysis. Another thing which I want to say is, yes, of course, we have to constantly live with this colonial, this baggage, which now we should try to shake it off because 50s movement, which I today concentrated on, that was a time when, although we were supposed to be part of postcolonial India, but that does not, 1947 does not automatically mean that yes, from this time onwards, everybody is free and you can distance yourself from the past. It doesn't happen that way. So during that time, we find this is a problem. The reason why that euphoria died down very quickly is because none of these great aestheticians were extremely learned, but they could not get out of a defensive reaction. So they continued to be conditioned by the Western critiques. As a result, they would always defend compared to say, you have said that we don't have a long tradition of tragedy. And of course we have a long tradition of tragedy. For example, Mahabharata is nothing but long tragedy, and so on. So what happens is, in that case, it may be right. But in other cases, you should have the confidence to say, okay, fine, you had it. Maybe we didn't have it. We didn't need it. Maybe there's some other issues which are important. So I think that would, for me, stand for greater confidence than constantly trying to blow the line saying, oh, we also have it. You see?
you as a person and to share them. Because I am like very much in love with Dalus and Godari and how they have influenced arts and aesthetics and how people understand say films and I've come across very interesting things from Australia where they have actually looked at it, and from I think Japan where they've looked at mechanics and robotics and then made connections like that with aesthetics and reality as well.
A lot of very experimental work on aesthetics was happening in France. Somebody has come up with robotic aesthetics who carries a robot to the Louvre and tries to gauge reaction of the robot in front of all these great masterpieces. So, there are so many very different ways of rethinking aesthetics, which also needs to be done because field needs to be revitalized more in context. We need to break free from that kind of colonial legacy, which is stifling real interesting creative research.
Can we say that aesthetics is more deeply embedded in Indian culture rather than the Western culture?
You mean that we should completely flip the hierarchy and say that it had, because we have a long history,
yes.
So we can lay more claim to it. Well, rather than saying that, I would see that as a defensive reaction, where we are again falling on the same trap of proving something to the West. Whereas if we broaden the term aesthetics as something which perhaps every culture can lay claim to, even tribal culture, which should not have written script and so on, but if you broaden the scope of aesthetics to include a practice, I mean, there's no way in which you can say that these people did not have aesthetic sense. Look at the artworks. After all, what is aesthetics? It's a kind of a very deliberate understanding of certain notions of symmetry, how you use your material in a particular way, which is going to give you some aesthetic pleasure. That is present. So just because there are no texts which back it up does not mean that they lack aesthetic sense. So I think it's very important to broaden these concepts. And this is where anthropology is such an important instructive discipline, because it is through anthropology that we learn even broaden these concepts to include so many cultural others.
Did more Indian to ancient or earlier rulers, they gave more emphasis on aestheticism as compared to West?
No, I think we also need to problematize certain unevenness. Again, I would bring up unevenness in the context of traditional art practice. For example, there was a huge, schism between the realm of art practice, where most of the artisans Shilpi, they came from low caste, they had low caste status, compared to those people who actually wrote on the Shilpa Shastras, which are written in Sanskrit. They were largely of priestly class. So at that level itself we come across this unevenness in aesthetic. But of course that does not mean that when the artists were working, nobody was there to observe what they were doing. Of course these pundits were constantly moving in and out. There was a lot of interest in the art activity. But of course their understanding of labor, aesthetic labor, would be very different. They might be able to understand abstract certain ideas about ideas of beauty, but it would not come from the experience of actually, carving into the stone and doing all the hard work. So you find this is a problem which has to be addressed in terms of deep divide between the people who are makers of art and those who are theorists of art, which do not exist in the realm of social poetics. Because both the readers, the consumers, and the producers, those who actually, the poets, they came from the same cultural fabric.
Thank you.
I have another methodological question that sort of is an offshoot to this presentation, but generally a methodological question when we're doing art history is the use of the term West. And I was just curious about the reactions you've had presenting in different locations in the world to the use of that term West.
Yeah, because it would keep changing according to the context in which I would make presentation. So I was talking about that roundtable conference that I was part of at Getty Research Institute, where the divide was very much between the American art historians on the other side, whereas most of us who were invited from non-Western parts of the world, which included countries like India. So I was from India, people from Brazil, China, South Africa, Japan, we're all there. But at that particular moment when that question was raised, you could immediately feel this deep sense of divide between the American art historians on that side and us. So it keeps changing. Yes, I'm also deeply uncomfortable with using terms like the West, but what else do you use it? Of course, wherever there's a possibility of specifying it, so you can always say European, American, British, but it's a shorthand for talking about a particular, sort of broader constituency of thinkers and their intellectual discourse.
Thank you.
I think, shall we call it today? Yeah.
I'm not imposing my idea on you, but do you think that Indian old literature is more deep and detailed? So far as Nritya Shastra, Sangeeta Shastra, Kala Shastra is concerned, such comparative.
But it's wrong to say that, because it may be coming from our unfamiliarity or lack of knowledge about other cultural contexts. But what I know about the ancient Greek context, ancient Chinese context, they have a very rich aesthetic discourse. Yes. So that this might be coming just out of our lack of knowledge about other cultural systems.
Chinese literature on such subjects is translated into English.
That's the problem of Chinese.
So I don't know about it. But maybe I think internet.
Yeah, internet is not going to give you the most. Yeah, but it is just some starting point. And then to that you can start coming to know about the books that you can start reading. It's a good starting point, I would say.
Thank you.
So last question with respect to tribal art. Do you think that today the current position, comparative aesthetics, whether from the Western tradition or the Indian tradition, are in a position to able to completely be inclusive of the tribal art? Like we discussed earlier in the morning, we said it's when it's convenient, it's deemed as affinity. When it's not convenient, it's called as derivative. Do you think in the larger context, when we make this progression and kind of development in the field itself, there can be a sort of reconciliation in terms of how we, see a culture that's not written about, and even suppose say for Indian tribal art, even its own Indian aesthetic sense is not in a position to completely comprehend where it stems from, what its background is. Do you think would that be a possibility, especially when there's not much written material available for it, or do you think beyond the realm of India, maybe something from an African or maybe let's say even from Western aesthetic perspective, there can be such an inclusive outlook towards tribal art?
Yeah, in fact, the time is right for that kind of, what I would say, cross-cultural compatibilism, not just between Indian and Greek, which that has been done to death, but between those in the global south. Yeah. For example, between African aesthetics and maybe tribal Indian aesthetics, or Australian Aboriginal aesthetics. There might be some very interesting connections which need to explore. Because we're so obsessed with Euro-American. Constant comparisons are only made between Indian and Western. It's important that we break out of it. Thank you very much for your attention. I was waiting for this. Thank you.
Before all